Imagine a mountain that has always been there. Your great-grandparents saw it, their great-grandparents saw it. It's a constant, a silent, sleeping giant that defines the horizon. Now imagine that mountain is changing. The glaciers that clothed it for millennia are receding, not in a slow geological crawl, but in a rapid, visible retreat. Picture a group of people standing at the base of a similar melting glacier in Iceland holding a ceremony. Not for a person, not for a pet, but for the glacier itself. It's not just physics, it's grief. That's why people are holding mourning ceremonies for disappearing ice, lighting candles, singing songs, saying goodbye. It's not performative, it's personal. To most modern minds, this might seem strange, even silly. But what if they're onto something we've forgotten? What if the Earth has been trying to tell us something all along and we've just been too busy to listen? Part 1. The ancient truth we left behind. For thousands of years, long before shopping malls and smartphones, humans lived with a different understanding of the world. They didn't see rocks as just rocks or rivers as just water flowing downhill. They saw everything as alive, as having its own spirit, its own voice. This worldview, called Animism, wasn't some primitive misunderstanding of reality. It was a way of being in the world that recognized something profound. Everything is connected, everything has value, and nothing exists just for human use. Then something shifted. As civilizations grew, especially in the West, a new story took over. Humans were special, separate, superior. Nature became a backdrop, a resource, a thing to be managed and controlled. The mountain wasn't a living presence anymore, it was just a pile of rock and dirt, maybe good for mining or skiing. The forest wasn't a community of beings, it was timber, waiting to be harvested. According to Mikaela Loach, colonialism created a chasm between humanity and nature. It made us believe that humans are separate from and above nature rather than part of it, so that the destruction of nature would be justifiable. This shift, this idea that humans stand apart from and above the natural world, seemed to work pretty well for a while. We built cities, created technologies, and sent people to the moon, but now the Earth is responding, and it's not asking for permission. Indigenous people from the Arctic, Amazon Basin, Pacific Islands, Pacific Northwest, Central and West Africa, United States, South America, Australia, and the Himalayas are all reacting to the global warming crisis. Part 2, when the world fights back. Global warming has done something unexpected. It's not just melting ice caps and raising sea levels, it's actually forcing people, especially those Western thinkers who've spent centuries convinced of human superiority, to question everything they thought they knew about their place in the world. Here's the thing. You can't control a hurricane, you can't negotiate with a wildfire, you can't talk a drought into ending or convince the ocean to stop rising. Climate change is proving in the most dramatic way possible that nature isn't some passive stage where the human drama plays out. It's an active participant, and right now it's showing us just how little control we actually have. Gemma Deer's book Radical Animism, Reading for the End of the World, dives deep into this, showing how climate change is a blow to human narcissism. We've spent so long believing we're the main characters, the ones in charge, the intelligent species that gets to decide how everything works. But when entire coastlines disappear, when weather patterns our grandparents could predict become chaotic and strange, when forests burn and glaciers vanish despite all our technology and knowledge, it becomes impossible to maintain that old story. The mountains, the oceans, the very air itself all have agency. They act, they respond, they change things. And suddenly that ancient animistic understanding doesn't seem so outdated after all. Maybe our ancestors who treated rivers as relatives and mountains as elders weren't being superstitious. Maybe they understood something essential that we forgot in our rush to conquer and control. Part 3, the spiritual earthquake. According to Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass, it's not just land that is broken, but more importantly, our relationship to land. For indigenous communities who never abandon this way of seeing, climate change isn't just an environmental crisis, it's a spiritual one. Imagine your entire identity, your stories, your connection to the divine, all rooted in specific places, specific landscapes, specific relationships with the land. Now imagine watching those places transform or disappear entirely. When the salmon stop returning to rivers they've travelled for thousands of years, it's not just about losing a food source. It's about a broken relationship and a spiritual contract that's been violated. When sacred mountains lose their snow, when ancestor trees die from heat and drought, when the animals featured in creation stories can no longer survive in their traditional ranges, the pain goes deeper than data or statistics can capture. Some belief systems are actually shifting in response. Gods and spirits who were once seen as benevolent providers are being reinterpreted as punitive forces. A god or spirit previously seen as a generous provider of rain and life might now be reconceptualized as an agent of necessary destruction, or a warning. It's not that these communities are abandoning their beliefs, they're adapting them, trying to understand what these massive changes mean in their spiritual framework. If the land is angry, if the spirits are upset, what did we do wrong? What needs to change? How do we restore balance? This isn't about blame, it's about communities, watching their spiritual worlds transform alongside their physical ones, trying to maintain meaning and connection in the face of unprecedented change. Part 4, the quiet ones who see clearly. The deep thinkers, the ones who've always felt more comfortable observing than performing. The introverts who process the world internally before speaking. They're often the ones who understand this shift most profoundly. These aren't the loudest voices in the room, but they're the ones who've been paying attention. And in many ways, the return to animistic thinking, this re-recognition of the aliveness of the world, comes naturally to them. Because animism requires a certain kind of attention. It requires noticing, listening, being present with something other than your own thoughts and needs. It requires the capacity to sit quietly and feel the world around you, to recognize that you're not the center of everything. These are things that thoughtful, introverted people often excel at, even if the modern world doesn't always value these qualities. Part 5. New Rituals for a Changing World. According to Robert M. Tyndall, you cannot poison the earth if you instinctively recognize it as the organic extension of your own body and mind. Something remarkable is emerging from this crisis. Indigenous people are creating new practices, new rituals, new ways of relating to a world in transformation. Those glacier funerals aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a broader movement of acknowledging the life and death of natural entities. Some theorists are talking about radical animism, expanding the concept beyond traditional definitions. It's not just about seeing trees and animals as alive anymore. It's about recognizing agency in everything, even things we typically consider purely mechanical or technological. The climate itself, these theorists suggest, might be understood as an entity with its own responses and patterns, something that acts rather than something that's acted upon. Others are exploring scientific animism, trying to bridge that old divide between rational inquiry and spiritual understanding. There are projects where scientists approach ecosystems with reciprocity, not just extraction. Planting seagrass becomes not just an environmental restoration project, but an exchange, a giving back, an acknowledgement of relationship rather than just resource management. Indigenous communities are adapting too, using their specialized knowledge in new ways. These aren't static, frozen-in-time cultures. They're dynamic, creative, and responsive. They're taking ancient principles and applying them to entirely new challenges, showing that traditional ecological knowledge isn't about preserving the past, but about surviving and thriving in an uncertain future. Part 6. The Reciprocal Future. On Iceland's Okkjökull Glacier Memorial Plaque, Icelandic writer Andri Snær Magnusson wrote the inscription, "OK is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and know what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it." What global warming is really forcing us to confront is this: the old relationship isn't working. The model of humans as separate from and superior to nature, as managers and controllers and extractors, that story is collapsing under the weight of its own consequences. The new story, or perhaps the very old story we're finally ready to hear again, is about reciprocity. It's about recognizing that when we take, we must also give. When we receive, we must also care for. When we act, we create responses. The earth isn't a thing to be used. It's a partner in an ongoing relationship, and like any relationship, it requires respect, attention, and genuine care. This isn't about romanticizing the past or abandoning science and reason. It's about integrating different ways of knowing, recognizing that indigenous wisdom and modern understanding can work together. It's about expanding our sense of who and what matters, who gets to have a voice, what counts as alive and valuable. The mountains have always been speaking. The oceans have always been responding. The forests have always been breathing with us. We just built a world where we couldn't hear them anymore. Climate change, for all its devastation and danger, is forcing us to listen again. And maybe, just maybe, that listening will save us.